As we said earlier, if as the parent, you're not feeling grounded and you're super worried, that's going to convey over to your kiddo. So helping the parent navigate this process, helping them also understand the strategies that you're working with their student on, and getting that grasp really then becomes beneficial. And so like for us, we follow up each session with a student with a lesson note via email so the parents can really see what transpired during each session and then watch the trajectory. And it's a nice way for us to keep everybody on the same page. And we share that with other professionals if a parent would like us to. But we can then take that information and help weave it into supports at school. Because oftentimes there's students at school that are masking and appear to be doing quote unquote fine. And then they come home and it's a different scenario. I have a question. Sometimes I've had parents will just text me on the side. I do attend meetings, but oftentimes my goal is to empower the parents and have them ready for success so that they have all the information going into that meeting.
Right. That's wonderful. And referring back a little bit with the, the creation of the IEP itself, is the idea behind it is a scaffolding, right, towards transition out of secondary school. So it makes so much sense that the parents' input from the start is critical, and that we're following a path, even though we know children change. We know the light goes on sometimes 5 years later, after you've had them at 3 years old, and all of a sudden at 8, all of a sudden the light goes on, and maybe you change course a little bit. But everything's been building towards that ultimate post-secondary life. And I find that a lot of parents that I've met are kind of in the dark, even during the secondary years, because things haven't kind of started rolling already for them, and they don't necessarily know where to go. With the IEP process, then, are you kind of intimately involved in the development of the IEP then with the team as well, or do they kind of create it and then consult with you afterwards? How does that function?
A little bit of all of that, right? And so it's kind of helping parents understand what I like to call the 4 E's, right? If they're looking to get an IEP, educating them on the process, educating them on how to create their own evidence of why there's an impact for this student. And again, some schools may say an academic impact, and I always love to remind families that special education is more than academics. It's an educational impact from bell to bell. So looking at transitions, playtime, specials, lunchtime, anything from bus to bus, bell to bell, and looking at
I like that
cognitive processing, memory, and attention. Of course, your academics, but also social and emotional, physical, sensory, function.
So I wonder, your experience in the deaf population at all is when it regards reading.
Well, I want to hear your experience. I didn't realize it was as in depth as that. Yeah. How did you navigate
have me on your
that?
show and we could talk about that.
Yeah. I was like, all right, this is way more insightful than I can offer. I feel like that's a bigger conversation.
It is a big conversation. It was a conversation that was always on the table, and one that was always perplexing. And there were a lot of different ideas, but there was never any real set curriculum. And so that was, I don't know if it's changed since. I've been out of it for a few years now, so I'm not quite sure where they're at as far as that goes. And I know with the cochlear implants, obviously, the approach is different. When I was teaching, it was really challenging, starting basically with vocabulary, but trying to build sentences and teach English grammar, it was really challenging.
That. But also you're talking about somebody's baby. And so really trying to humanize that process and finding that balance. I'm spacing on the name. I should know this. I recorded with some guests. They wrote a really great book, and they talk about the third voice at the IEP table, right? And so that you have your parent voice, you have the team voice, and then coming together, the third voice. So we're not always going to get everything but really coming together with that child in mind and what we can do to better support that student. And so back to the parents and educating them in terms of collecting that evidence and knowing your kid what works best in terms of what their needs are when it comes to that processing, memory, and attention, coming to, social, emotional communication, whatever that may be, and what are some best ways that you've seen from a parent heart and a parent stance work really well with your kid. And like I said earlier, it's a different language. It is driven by a law, and sometimes the law is not easy to understand. And then understanding your parental rights and what that looks like and what you can ask for. And so it is that educational process. And again, your fear and love. And so it's your baby and you really want the best for your baby. And so it becomes a little tricky, and to have somebody that is not as emotionally invested as you would with your own personal child. Not to say that I'm not emotionally invested with my families, but it's very different when it's your own personal child. So to have somebody that can kind of remove some of that quick emotion and walk through the process is super valuable.
Sure. Right. Kind of cut to the chase a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right. So the educational strategist, that goes in with the therapist as well. You're creating the strategies as an educational strategy.
Thinking of the progression of reading for a student, and then understanding in that process where is that breakdown, and meeting that student where they are, and then moving them forward.
Okay. Yeah, because I think that, reading to me is something that can be not necessarily put to the side necessarily, but I think that it can be something that people feel like it's such a difficult challenge to get their child to read, that they don't really know where to turn. And from my experience, have you ever worked with the deaf population at all, or kids with cochlear implants?
Yes.
How do you find that experience? Because, that was one of the larger challenges, was trying to overcome the language barriers to teach English, which is such a complicated language when you can't hear it. When you can hear it, when you're coming from another country, if you can hear it, it's very challenging. So how have you addressed dealing with some other questions about what you do? But as far as your reach, I know you're in Maryland, and so I know obviously people are there in person, but do you deal with people remotely around the country so they could reach you?
We do. Yep, we absolutely do. And so our one-on-one support is done either in person or remotely. We have students with all over the United States and even outside of the United States, and the same thing with supporting families with special education. When it comes to the law, mainly is within the United States, because that's what governs special education law here. And so the community is all done, either through Zoom or through a different platform. And then same thing with helping parents and coaching parents as well. This morning I was on with a parent in New York, coaching them through their next IEP meeting. And so it's really a great way to kind of cast the wider net in supporting families.
Absolutely. And what you offer is so needed and so critical for people. And I can just imagine at this community program the wealth of knowledge that parents can walk away with, and the confidence that they can walk away with going into that meeting, and feel like on an equal level with administration and school officials, where I know this can be a very intimidating situation. So that's really incredible. And what I want to know also is your staffing. Like, what type of people do you have on your staff?
Gives us that framework that we can shorten the session. So if we have students, doing half-hour sessions a couple times a week, 45 minutes. So then they're getting what they need in the doses that is right for them.
Mm-hmm. The population that you serve of special ed kids, are they primarily neurodivergent children? Do you deal with children with multiple disabilities, emotional, physical, all types? Do you deal with everyone?
We do, yes. So we absolutely do. And again, we know if a family calls through that conversation, if we're not a good fit for them, I'm always happy to share resources. Again, it just shouldn't be that hard for a parent. And so if I have a resource of somebody that's not necessarily with us, that would be a better fit. In the end, it's just good karma and helps a parent out. So
Absolutely, absolutely. It comes back to you.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I've experienced some people who said that, with their child, one particular person I'm thinking, who was really multiply disabled. In some regards, the remote helped because there was less distraction in the classroom. So, but it really is so individual.
And, citing evidence and understanding what you just read. Some students don't always make that mental imagery in their head when they're trying to read. And so going through that process and kind of teaching them how to visualize what they've read and then to be able to verbalize what they've read and to then articulate that in an organized fashion on paper for a written response, whether it is through a class assignment or an essay and responding to an exam.
Because I think reading can be one of the bigger challenges, right, for kids and for teachers even, in knowing how to actually get through to a child and teach them how to read. Could you give one example of what you were just talking about as far as how you might make that visualization possible for them?
Right. So there's a lot of hands-on methods you can do. Some of them are kind of hand signals. I know people that are listening can't see, but making sure that a student really understands "I" for I, and then kind of we scratch our hand so that then you can give them a nonverbal, or being able to hear all the sounds within words to help them with studying. And then we'll create letters, whether it's with Play-Doh or wooden shapes, and then creating a tag, so to say, in their brain so they'll understand this visual mental imagery when it comes to something that they're reading, and to then be able to understand nonsense words.